Hi and welcome to the Philosopher's Games. Let's start with a little warning. This video contains heavy Lord of the Rings and Shadow of Mordor spoilers. Also note that this is just a neutral comparison between the book's lore and Shadow of Mordor. When it comes to books, The Lord of the Rings is one of my favorites, especially in combination with the Silmarillion, that's background story of the Lord of the Rings universe, the book. Whenever you stumble upon a character, a place or an element of the plot itself and ask yourself, why is that? There is in most cases an answer in the appendix of the Lord of the Rings books or in the Silmarillion, and this makes Lord of the Rings so special and has also strongly influenced other writers and the fantasy genre itself. But let's move to the main question. What are the differences in Shadow of Mordor and why do they exist? So to say, is the story of Shadow of Mordor canon in terms of the Tolkien Universe? The short answer, no, it isn't. Even the movies have a lot of differences and differ from the book's canon. Part of this problem is that Tolkien put a lot of thought into his universe and some topics are hard to transport in a few movies or an open-world action RPG. Another part is that nobody except Christopher Tolkien has the rights to the Silmarillion, so they don't have access to a lot of the backstory. And Christopher Tolkien dislikes the direction of the movies and probably the games too, so that won't change in the near future. And he is also the only one able to make something canon. But let's have a look at some specific elements. The game takes place in between the events of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. It starts with the game's protagonist Talion, his family and other Gondorian rangers who are a small force to guard the Black Gate of Mordor, getting killed by Sauron's forces. Here we have the first difference. At this time, the Black Gate and surroundings were not guarded by Gondor anymore and Mordor controlled the area. It is true that Gondor once built fortresses, for example Durthang, to watch over Mordor's activities, but not during that time period. Watching over this area started in the early years of the Third Age, so a bit after the events of the last alliance of elves and men, and lasted until Gondor neglected this task a bit after a civil war called the Kin-strife. This was in the year 1447 of the Third Age. As a comparison, Bilbo's journey from the Hobbit started 2941 of the Third Age, and Shadow of Mordor plays after this, so from the book's perspective, the gate was abandoned by Gondor for about 1600 years at this point. The next difference is quite big and also a bit difficult to explain, so a lot of background story incoming. In the game, Sauron's forces kill everyone and sacrifice Talion and his family in a ritual to summon the dead elven lord Celebrimbor as a Wraith. But Celebrimbor merges with the dying Talion, making the human immortal. In the books, the concept of death, especially for entities that are not divine beings, is very strict. Especially for humans. They were given a gift by the one transcendent god who created everything in the book's universe, called Eru Iluvatar. The gift was their mortality and an unknown future after their death. This is a so-called gift of man. With this said, death is to some degree well described in the Lord of the Rings universe, and it is also an important concept. There is a divine entity called Mandos. He is one of the Valar, the highest group of divine entities, comparable to angels and a pantheon of gods. He pronounced judgment in matters of fate, and if a human, an elf or a dwarf dies, his spirit will directly go inside the halls of Mandos. What happens there? Well, elves can maybe leave the halls of Mandos at some point and will be reincarnated in Valinor, the place where those divine entities live. Dwarves also enter the halls of Mandos but are separated, waiting until the end of the world to help with the recreation of it. And humans leave the halls of Mandos and will be taken to an unknown place, away from this world. This has to do with their gift of man. But aren't there any exceptions? Well, there are. We have, for example, Beren, a legendary human hero, and his wife Luthien, a legendary elfish woman, but they actually went to the halls of Mendes after their deaths, and Luthien was granted a wish by the god that she and Beren were revived, with her becoming mortal. By the way, parts of this story are mirrored by their descendants, Aragorn and Arwen. Another exception many will probably think of are the ring wraiths, the Nazgul. Well, they are technically not dead, or let's say they never died. This is totally different depicted in, for example, the Hobbit movies. But when the 9 kings of men received their 9 rings of power from Sauron, they were transformed into Nazgul and subdued by Sauron's will. So they never had the chance to visit the halls of Mandos. Another Nazgul and Sauron-related exception only known in the books are the so-called Balrogs. Well, actually we don't know for sure what is going on with them, but it seems they are evil spirits or demons that possess the remains of dead people from the Dunedain kingdom of Cardolan. So what are evil spirits? Well, here we have another exception. Some beings that were very evil and allied with the evil forces of Sauron's master Morgoth, or formerly known as Melkor, a divine entity of high rank, one of the mentioned Valar. He is pretty much the devil, are not allowed to enter the halls of Mandos, for example Saruman after his death. These spirits are stripped of their power and doomed to wander around waiting for the end of the world. There is the theory that this is also the nature of the Balrogs, but we don't know for sure. This leads well into another exception. You remember that ghost army from Lord of the Rings? What happened to them is pretty much the same situation. They were not granted access to the halls of Mandos, and they were also cursed. Those men had sworn loyalty to Isildur to battle Sauron, but when Isildur called them for the fight of the last alliance of elves and men, they hid themselves, not fulfilling their oath. Not only that, they had also in their past allied with Sauron. After breaking their oath, Isildur cursed them, and it seems that the mentioned transcendent god and creator of everything, Ilúvatar, himself accepted this curse, and so they were doomed to stay in this ghost form. Note that in the books, in contrast to the movies, they were not able to physically interact with anything, but were very good in frightening others. And that is also how they helped Aragorn in the books. Long story short, should you die in the Lord of the Rings universe and are denied to access the halls of Mandos, you are doomed to stray the world as a spirit, but pretty much lose all your abilities and can't interact with the physical world anymore. Even very powerful beings can do this, like Saruman, Maya himself, that is a divine being of lower rank and helper of the mentioned Valar, also comparable to an angel of lower rank. So should Celebrimbor become a ghost, he would for sure not wield such immense powers, especially since he's only an elf. A very special one, but still just an elf. Is it now possible for him to become a wraith? Well, no. The backstory of him and his family is very tragic, but Celebrimbor was actually a very good guy. His grandfather was Fëanor, the greatest elven artifactsmith of all time. His masterpiece were 3 jewels called the Silmarillion. Long story short, they got stolen by Morgoth, the mentioned master of Sauron, and Fëanor and his sons, including Celebrimbor's father Curufin, swore an oath to return them by any means necessary. This led into many terrible deeds by Fëanor and his sons, and this oath became some kind of curse. But even Fëanor himself, after all of this, was not denied access into the halls of Mandos. Also, Celebrimbor did not actively follow his father or grandfather and even opposed their quest. Then later Celebrimbor became the Lord of Eregion and was approached by a disguised Sauron, who introduced himself as Anatar, Lord of Gifts, and maybe foreshadowing the arrival of the Istari, the 5 wizards sent by the Valar, namely Saruman, Gandalf, Radagast and the 2 blue wizards. So Celebrimbor accepted his gifts and teachings. With the new knowledge, he and some other elves from Eregion crafted a total of 16 rings of power and some other magical rings supervised by Sauron. But Celebrimbor actually didn't trust Anatar and made his strongest rings, the 3 elven rings of power, in secret. And after finding out Anatar's true identity, after Sauron finished the 1 ring in secret, Celebrimbor sent his rings away to hide them. He sent 1 to Galadriel, 1 to the High King of the Noldor elves, Gil-galad, and 1 to the elven shipwright, Círdan. In addition, all elves stopped wearing their rings so that the One Ring could not control them. With this, Sauron was angry that his plan didn't work out and conquered Eregion with a very big army. And so Eregion was destroyed and Celebrimbor captured. The great deed of Celebrimbor in this context was he did not tell Sauron where his 3 elven rings of power were, even under torture. He must have died in Eregion. In the unfinished tales, which are not canon too, but consist of thoughts and notes of Tolkien himself, you can read how the orcs carried the dead body of Celebrimbor on a pole through the streets of Eregion. All this didn't happen unnoticed. As you can see, Mordor is quite far away from Eregion, and the king of the elves, Gil-galad, sent troops there, led by characters we all know well from The Lord of the Rings, Elrond and Celeborn, the husband of Galadriel. I think Elrond arrived first and was in a lot of trouble, so he had to withdraw and found a garrison that was later known as Imladris or Rivendell. With all those events, a big war started, including the elves and even the dwarves, who fought against Mordor's forces. Sauron had probably little time during all of this to travel back to Mordor, but we come to this later. To finish the story, Gil-galad, being in a lot of trouble, wisely called for help from the ridiculously powerful human kingdom of the Dunedain on the island of Númenor, that is where Aragorn's ancestors are from and who later founded the kingdom of Gondor. And they sent a very powerful army that joined the battle and helped destroying Sauron's approach to conquer Middle-earth. Would they not have come, Sauron would probably have won there. That was a lot of backstory, but to summarize it, Celebrimbor was a really good guy who also proved this in his last moments, not betraying his people, and you could interpret it as being a contrast to the deeds of his grandfather. In addition, he was actively opposing Sauron and even paid with his life for it. There is literally no reason and no way he would not be able to enter the halls of Mandos. And also falling into a revenge by any means necessary attitude would be very close to his grandfather's attitude, which he opposed, and in this context would not fit to his character, since this story was already told. He also was not transformed into a Nazgul-like being. Now, with all of this explained, we have the opportunity to look at another difference that is heavily related to this. As mentioned, Celebrimbor could not have helped Sauron to improve the One Ring. First of all, Sauron is a divine entity, a so-called Maya, who was originally apprentice of the smith's god, the Valar Aule. There is not much that Sauron couldn't have accomplished himself, considering that he fought very powerful elves, dwarves and humans, and maybe other Maya for thousands of years. It becomes very clear that he is a true powerhouse of evil in the world. Second, as explained, he was in a giant war against elves and dwarves to conquer Middle-earth. he wouldn't be able to easily return to Mordor, mess around with Celebrimbor and his small rebellion and come back with him later, nobody noticing. So from a lore or book's perspective, this doesn't work out. But what's with the Shadow of War trailer? We see a new ring of power. As explained before, Celebrimbor shouldn't be there anyway. Should in an alternate universe he be there as a ghost-like being, he would not be able to interact with the physical world, so he can forge a ring. In addition, I can't imagine that Celebrimbor would see any reason to make more rings of power, because the last time it brought doom over Middle-earth, and as mentioned, he's actually a very good guy. Oh, and the text on the ring itself in the trailer makes no sense. The writer probably assumed that the font he used sorted the letters on the keyboard in the same way our alphabet is sorted on the keyboard. So that, for example, the Tengwar letter corresponding to V is also the V on the keyboard, but that is not the case. In addition, it is not written in Quenya or Sindarin or Black speech, but instead in English, and a Reddit user reconstructed it to redeem the land of shadow. So some little mistakes there. Then we see a Balrog in the trailer. Well, Balrogs are very scary and powerful beings. They are as Sauron under the command of Morgoth and Maiar themselves. It is not clear what role this Balrog plays in Shadow of War, but it's unknown and even unlikely that Sauron was able to control them. Sure, Sauron was second in command after Morgoth, even though Gothmog, the High Captain of the Balrogs, had a similar rank, but after Sauron lost the One Ring, he lost a lot of power, so wielding Balrogs in his armies was quite unlikely, but on the other hand, he maybe could work together with them. There is no need to flat out control them, and in the end, they have the same master and similar goals. One problem could be that only few Balrogs still exist, and most of them hid somewhere far away, except for Durin's Bane, the Balrog that Gandalf fights in Moria in The Lord of the Rings. There are still more differences I could cover, but the video is already very long, so I will stop here. Overall, I like the ideas of Shadow of Mordor's gameplay and was quite surprised that they were able to make such a refreshing game. This video is also not about right and wrong or good and bad, just about the differences and to help people understand those. When it comes to Shadow of Mordor stories, of course I personally wished they would have taken fewer freedoms, but I learned a lot while doing the research for this video, and a lot of the game's fun comes from these differences, so I'm happy with it, and I hope I could answer some of your questions too. If you have further questions or comments, feel free to write them down in the comments. If you are interested in more Lord of the Rings lore videos or comparisons, let me know. Thank you for watching and goodbye.